Evening, friends. I'm Beau LeClair, and this here's the Dixie Tales, where the Deep South still whispers if you listen close. These are the stories that never made the history books, but live on in the heat, the dust, and the hush between crickets. So pull up a chair, tap that like, and subscribe if you believe some truths are too wild to stay buried. Now, let's begin. Settle in close now, friend. The fire's burning low, the cypress are whispering, and this is one of those nights when Louisiana feels just a little too alive. Nights like this, the swamp remembers things people tried to forget, and if you lean in real careful, you can hear music drifting through the dark, not brass, not gospel, but a fiddle so fast and fierce it sounds like sparks flying off steel. That's the sound that used to belong to one man, a man the old folks still refuse to speak of after sundown. Gaston Louiseau. Most called him Bully, and he was the Hoodoo Fiddler who beat the devil at his own damn game. Now, before we step any further into this story, I need you to understand something folks from outside Louisiana never quite grasp. The line between the natural and the supernatural here ain't thin, it's braided. Hoodoo and hymns, river spirits and rosaries, prayers whispered into candles, and bargains whispered into swamp water. Down here, belief ain't an option, it's survival. And the folks from street Landry Parish used to say that Gaston Louiseau survived more by the spirits than by breath alone. I first heard the tale sitting beside my great-uncle Etienne on a porch that leaned so far to the left you had to tilt your body just to stay upright. Fireflies flickered like lost souls drifting through humid air, and Etienne tapped his cane against the floorboards in a slow rhythm that told me he remembered this story better than he remembered half his kin. He said the sound of that cane tap was how Bully Louiseau always announced himself, a rhythm, a pulse, a beat that pulled the air tight like a drumhead. And once that rhythm started, the fiddle came next, fast as lightning and twice as dangerous. See, in the bayous around Street Landry, folks used to swear Bully didn't learn fiddle from any man. They said he learned it from the thing that lived beneath Bayou Noir, a place so dark the sun seemed to drown before it touched the water. Old fishermen told of a spirit there, one older than the river, older than the moss, older than anything that ever crawled out of creation. They called it Le Grand Noir, the drowning one, the Black River Guardian, a spirit that hated light and loved music and only showed itself to those it chose. And for some reason no one understood, it chose Gaston Louiseau. He was born in 1878 to a Creole family who worked a little patch of land no bigger than the breath between two prayers. His mama was a root woman, quiet, stern, with herbs hanging from every rafter and a talent for speaking to spirits through cracked bowls of water. His daddy was a barrel maker who drank too much but played fiddle like he was trying to shake the demons out his bones. The boy came out with both their gifts, steady hands, quick fingers, and a stare that made even grown men shift their weight. By 8 years old, he could tune a fiddle faster than most men could roll a cigarette. By 10, he was playing reels that set front porches shaking. But there was something wrong in that music, or maybe something too right. Folks claimed they felt a pull when he played, a strange heaviness in the ribs, like their heartbeat had to decide whether to follow the bow or run from it. Things changed the night Bully disappeared. It was 1891. Storm season, thick and wild. Thunder rolled like the sky was splitting its own spine. Gaston's mama realized the boy wasn't in his bed. His fiddle was gone, his boots too. All that remained was a single wet footprint on the wooden floor, a footprint too big for a child and shaped wrong, long and narrow, like something from the river had stepped into the house. They searched till sunrise. No sign. On the third night, when his mama stood on the porch praying and crying into her apron, the cicadas cut off all at once. The wind froze, and from somewhere deep in the cypress, a fiddle screamed a note so high the dogs started howling. Then Bully stepped out of the tree line, soaking wet, eyes dark like he'd been staring into something bottomless, fiddle in hand. And from that night on, nobody questioned whether the boy had been found or returned. Folks in Street Landry said he came back wrong, but not evil, just touched by music, by spirits, by something the rest of us ain't built to understand. His daddy tried to teach him the old songs, but Bully didn't need 'em. He made his own. Tunes nobody had ever heard before. Tunes he claimed he didn't invent, he just listened to something that whispered them into his ear. People asked what he'd seen in Bayou Noir. He'd always answer with the same sentence, voice flat and distant. "The river taught me." The boy grew into a man with long arms and restless eyes. He never married, though every dance hall in Opelousas tried to claim him. He played with a style no fiddle master could replicate, bow flying, rosin smoking, strings humming like bees in a jar. Folks swore they saw sparks fly off the wood when he hit certain notes. Some claimed the bow smoked. Others said his shadow didn't match the movement of his hands. But for all the tales, the strangest part was this. Whenever Bully Louiseau played, the spirits came. Candles flickered sideways even with no wind. Water in glasses rippled. People forgot their own thoughts. It was like something in the air shifted when his bow touched the strings, like the world paused to listen. And that's when the devil took notice. Now, you'll hear 100 stories across the South about folks who challenged the devil to fiddle and duels. But this one ain't a copy. This one's the root. The old players, the black Creole masters, the Cajun string men, the hoodoo musicians, they all knew the truth. The devil came to street Landry Parish not cause he wanted a soul, but because he wanted a sound. See, music is its own kind of magic, and the devil hates being outdone at any craft. He'll tolerate a preacher louder than him, but he won't tolerate a musician better. And one night, deep in the swamp, just after the lanterns went out at Baptiste's juke, Bully finished a set that left folks breathless and half frightened. He walked outside to cool off, fiddle tucked under one arm. That's when a stranger stepped from the cypress. Tall, thin, wearing a hat too clean for swamp air, and the crickets fell silent. People inside claimed they couldn't move, like the air thickened into syrup. Some said they saw the stranger's shadow before they saw him long, wrong, stretched like a rope pulled too tight. No one heard what was said, no one saw what bargain was offered, but they saw the fiddle duel. To this day, old-timers swear they heard it from miles away, two bows battling like thunder and river water colliding. The sound so fierce it shook moss loose from trees. No one saw the stranger leave. But when Bully came back inside, his eyes had changed, darker, wilder, and he played the rest of the night like he was holding the world's heartbeat in his hands. Some folks believed he won. Others believed the devil spared him out of respect. Either way, the music just got faster. His reputation spread across Louisiana like fire through dry cane. Word traveled down to New Orleans, up toward Natchitoches, over to Baton Rouge. Riverboats hired him. Juke joints fought to book him. Hoodoo queens sent for him. But Bully Louiseau stayed tethered to the swamp, claiming he owed the river something or that it owed him. That brings us to the night he died. Not from violence, not from sickness, but from a ritual whispered by the oldest women in street. Landry as the Black River ritual, a ceremony nobody practiced unless the spirits themselves demanded it. A ritual that required river water, moonlight, and a musician who had touched the other side. The exact details died with the generation before mine, but the bones of the tale remain. Bully played. One last song, at midnight, knee-deep in Bayou Noir. Folks say the water glowed, the trees leaned in, and the river rose around him like arms lifting a child. When morning came, his fiddle floated alone at the edge of the bank. Not a sign of Bully, not a footprint, not a ripple. And every year, on that same night, people swear they hear a fiddle playing from the center of the bayou, fast, fierce, and smoking like the boughs burning itself alive. That's the legend of the Hoodoo Fiddler who beat the devil. But that's just the beginning, because some stories end in a grave, and some stories keep playing long after the musician's gone. Come on in a little closer here, friend. Nights like this have long memories, and if you don't settle your spirit before hearing a tale like this, the darkness out there might start listening a little too close. Bully Louiseau was a man who never fully belonged to the living after that night in Bayou Noir. And Section 2 is where folks first began to understand just how deeply the river had changed him. Most musicians down here play from the fingers or the heart. Bully played from somewhere deeper, somewhere the rest of us don't have a name for. Some folks said it came from the ribs, others said the spine, others swore it was the river itself flowing through his veins. But the ones who knew his people, the old Creole families from street, Landry understood it was something far older than bone or blood. It was inheritance, not the kind you sign papers for, but the kind you're born with whether you want it or not. When Bully came back from the swamp after that missing night, His mama tried to cleanse him. She lined candles across the doorway, burned red brick dust on the stove, and prayed in both French and in that older language that sounds like whispers being traded between angels and undertakers. She sprinkled him with river water, then holy water, then a mixture of herbs that turned the air sharp as cut, ginger. But none of it changed him. If anything, the rituals just confirmed her fear. She said the boy had gone where living folks had no business going. She said the swamp had given him something, and it had taken something too. What it took was sleep. After that night, Bully hardly slept more than an hour at a time. Not 'cause he was restless, but 'cause the music woke him. He'd sit up like a man startled by a ghost, hands twitching, eyes unfocused, like he was hearing a tune nobody else could catch. Then, he'd pick up his fiddle and play until dawn. Sometimes the strings broke. Sometimes the bow splintered. One time the bridge cracked clean in half like it had been crushed under a stone. Yet no matter how many instruments he ruined, he always found another. The fiddle followed him the way hounds follow a scent. And the strangest part, Bully Louiseau never bought a single fiddle. Folks left them for him, on porches, on stumps in the woods, leaned against his window like offerings. Some old men claimed they didn't even know why they carved one until they found it in their hands, varnish still sticky, strings humming even in silence. Something about the boy or the spirit the boy carried inspired men to make gifts they couldn't explain. But the most powerful fiddle he ever touched wasn't carved by human hands. People believe instruments come with their own memory. Music lives in the wood, in the grain, in the way the strings vibrate. And if that's true, then the fiddle Bully found at age 16 carried a memory older than Louisiana itself. He found it hanging from a low branch beside Bayou Noir, swaying gently even though there was no wind. It was dark wood, almost black, smooth as river stone, no carvings, no maker's mark. Just a faint sheen like moonlight trapped inside the varnish. The bow hanging beside it was worse. Too long, too thin, strung with hair whiter than bone. He took both without hesitation. That fiddle became his companion, his weapon, his curse, and his blessing. And from the moment he touched it, the world changed around him in small but powerful ways. Women felt a chill when he entered a room. Babies stared at him like they recognized something in his eyes. Dogs barked but never approached. Candles leaned toward him, even without a breeze. And whenever he played in a cabin or a hall, the shadows along the walls danced out of sync with the people moving in front of them. If you asked the elders what that meant, they'd nod slow and say the same thing every time. He walked between worlds now, and the world of spirits was always closer than the world of men. People say his playing got faster after he took that fiddle, but fast wasn't the real miracle. It was precision. Every note hit exactly where the spirits wanted it. Every tremble of the bow had purpose. Folks said they could hear two melodies at once when he played one soft and earthly, one sharp and foreign, like it belonged to the river spirits that taught it to him. And on certain nights, when the air got heavy and the moon hung low like a sickle, they said his music turned into a language, not spoken, not sung, commanded. One night at a church house dance in Opelousas, the preacher's mule broke loose and ran wild through the yard, kicking and braying loud enough to drown out the band. People screamed, kids ran, but Bully didn't stop playing. He just lifted his chin slightly, changed the tune, and the mule froze mid-stride, like it had been nailed to the earth. It didn't move again until Bully slid the bow off the strings. That was when people stopped calling him gifted and started calling him dangerous. But danger draws a crowd in Louisiana, and the juke joints along the bayou depended on musicians who made the hair on your arms stand up. Bully Louiseau filled every room he ever walked into. Fishermen, farmers, rivermen, root doctors. Even Catholic priests came sometimes, dressed plain so. Nobody recognized them, sitting quiet in the corners with their hats low. They said they were only there to watch for sin, but if you looked close, you could see their toes tapping inside their shoes. Nobody could resist the pull. And Bully, he never bragged, never smiled, never introduced a song. He'd just nod once, set the bow on the strings, and let whatever spirit lived in the woods speak for him. That's how the trouble started. One Saturday night in '96, Bully played at a juke hall on the edge of Street Landry, a place built too close to the swamp and too far from salvation. The room was packed. Sweat ran down the walls. The air tasted like rum and heat and old secrets. Bully stood on a crate in the corner, his fiddle tucked tight against his jaw. He played a tune that twisted through the room like smoke, slow at first, then sharper, louder, wild. By the second chorus, the lamps flickered. By the third, people swore the floorboards were breathing. And by the final verse, something answered him. It wasn't a voice, wasn't a knock, wasn't anything you could call human. It was a sound from outside, a rumble like distant thunder, but the sky was clear. A vibration like drums underwater, a growl, a groan, nobody could say. The women covered their ears, the men froze mid-step. Even the lantern flames leaned sideways, like they were trying to run. And Bully didn't stop. He kept playing, eyes wide, jaw clenched, bow moving so fast the strings smoked. When he finally struck the last note, the room shook like something huge had just walked past the walls. Nobody left that juke sober. The next morning, the preacher at Street, Martins told the congregation he'd heard the devil's footsteps in the swamp. Folks nodded because they had heard them too. After that night, rumors spread faster than the river after a storm. Some said Bully had summoned the devil without meaning to. Others said Le Grand Noir, the Black River spirit, had come to collect what it owned. Still others said it wasn't a spirit at all, but a shadow of something older that lived beneath the mud and waited for music to wake it. Whatever it was, the devil came soon after. Not in a puff of smoke, not in a flash of red, but the way hell always comes to Louisiana, disguised as a traveling man with a fine hat and 2 white teeth. Some swore they saw him riding a black mule down the road to Baptiste's place. Others claimed he stepped out of the water itself, clothes dry, shoes sheening like polished oil. But nearly everyone agreed the stranger arrived on a night when the moon hid behind clouds and even the frogs stayed quiet. He walked straight into the juke joint, leaned on the bar, and asked for the man who played like he stole music from heaven. That was Bully. And that night, a duel took place, so fierce the walls of the building never stood straight again. People years later would argue about what really happened inside that room. Some said the stranger played first, and his bow didn't touch the strings it burned across them. Others swore Bully started the duel, and his notes turned the air so tight the stranger's shadow snapped off the floor. A few claimed they saw the stranger's eyes glow red. Others insisted they saw no eyes at all. But the one detail every witness agreed on was this: Bully did not lose. When the stranger stopped playing, he tipped his hat, nodded once, and vanished. Not walked out, not slipped away. Vanished, the air filled with a smell like burnt sugarcane and rain on ashes. Bully lowered his fiddle, breathing hard. His left hand shook. His right hand smoked. The bowstring that pale, ghost-white hair had split down the middle like something had torn it from within. He lived, but something changed in him that night. His playing grew darker. He spoke less. He walked slower, like his feet remembered a place they were tied to. And when he played at night near the water, the river answered. Soft at first, then louder, until the night it swallowed him whole. But that's a story for the next part we are about to get into. Pull your chair in closer, friend. Nights like this deserve respect. And Section 3 is where the story slides from legend into something colder, something older, something the old root women of Street, Landry Parish, only whispered about when the lamps were low and the moss swayed like curtains drawn by unseen hands. They called it the Black River Ritual, and it weren't meant for ordinary folks. It was meant for the gifted, the cursed, and the ones the spirits had already marked. Now, as I tell this, know this much. Louisiana's swamps may look like slow water and soft mud, but they're deeper than scripture, deeper than sin. And down there, under the lily pads and the cypress knees, lies a world most folks never see unless they're born into it or foolish enough to call it up. Bully Louiseau was both. He'd been touched by that unseen world since the night he disappeared as a child. But after the devil's duel, something about him grew heavier, like the air around him had started carrying 2 weights, the weight of his own soul and the weight of whatever had followed him home. His eyes changed too. Not red or glowing. Folks get dramatic about that sort of thing. No, his eyes turned watery gray, the color of river silt after a storm. If you stared too long, you felt like you were looking into a depth that didn't end, and the old women noticed. You see, Southern hoodoo ain't superstition. It's a combination of memory and medicine carried across continents, mixed with Catholic saints, blended with African spirits, tempered by river magic, and overseen by women who knew that spirits love music the way lightning loves tall trees. So when Bully played the night after the devil left town, and the lamps flickered out one by one, and the air smelled like fresh dug earth, every root woman in a 10-mile circle knew exactly what had come for him. The river wanted him back. His mama, old Margot Louiseau, didn't wait for dawn. She sent word to the 3 most feared women in street: Landry, Tante Useline from Cypress Ridge, Ma Delacroix from Bayou Noir, and Yvette LaRose from the Opelousas quarters. These weren't midwives or healers. They were keepers, women who guarded the thin boundary between spirit and flesh, women who could bargain with a river, or at least delay its hunger. They arrived at the Louiseau cabin just after midnight, each carrying a small sack tied with red thread. Tante Useline brought bones from a black rooster. Ma Delacroix carried a jar of swamp water that glowed faintly at the bottom. And Yvette LaRose brought a candle carved with symbols older than the plantations. They walked into Bully's room and found him sitting on the floor, fiddle across his knees, Beau trembling in his right hand, not from fear, from restraint. He said he could hear the water calling, humming low, like a woman whispering against a window pane. "The river sings for me," he murmured, but not in words. The old women didn't speak. They understood too well. When the river calls like that, it ain't music, it's summons. They formed a circle around him and lit the carved candle. Its flame burned blue, not orange. Then they placed the rooster bones in a ring, turning them one by one until the pattern matched the symbols on the candle. Ma Delacroix poured her glowing water across the floorboards. It didn't spread. It slithered, finding its own path, winding around Bully's feet like a serpent reclaiming something it once owned. That's when the cabin shook, not from wind, not from thunder, from something moving beneath the ground, pushing up through roots and mud, drawn to the boy whose music had rattled the veil open. Old Margot started to panic, but Yvette LaRose pressed a hand to her chest and told her softly, but with the weight of command, to stay still. The boy belonged to both worlds now, and if he wanted to stay in this one, he had to make a choice. This is the part of the story where folks like to exaggerate. They'll tell you Bully sprouted wings or levitated or screamed so loud the windows shattered. None of that happened. What did happen was far quieter and far worse. The cabin door eased open, not burst, not cracked, just eased, slow and steady, as if the swamp had sent something polite to fetch him. A smell drifted in, cool, black, and ancient, like the underside of river stones. The candle flame bent sideways. The rooster bones rattled. And from the doorway came a faint dripping sound, like water falling off something that wasn't supposed to be walking on land. The women tightened the circle. Bully's breath hitched. The floorboards darkened under the threshold. Old Margot fell to her knees, clutching her rosary so tight the beads cracked between her fingers. But faith alone can't stop a call from the river. The spirits that dwell in black water don't answer to saints or sermons. They answer to bargains and debts. And Bully had both. Tante Useline leaned down close and told him not with fear, but with reverence, that the river wasn't just asking for him, it was asking for his music. The duel with the devil had torn something open. Bully had played on the edge of creation itself, and things that hurt him wanted to hear more. But a human body can't hold that kind of music for long, not without help. That was the purpose of the Black River ritual. Not to save him from the spirits, that was impossible, but to anchor him so he could keep walking in this world without slipping through the cracks into the other. The ritual had 3 steps. Step 1. Recognition. He had to admit the spirits had a claim on him. Step 2. Offering. He had to give the river something to balance what it had given him. Step 3. Endurance. He had to withstand whatever the spirits demanded during the ritual without breaking. If he failed any step, the swamp would swallow him right then and there. The women instructed him to place his fiddle across his lap, bow on top, hands open. Then they began chanting in a language nobody wrote down, a blend of Old French, African Congo tongues, and something that sounded like the river gargling gravel. The floor shook harder. A dark streak crept toward Bully's feet. and then the water rose. Not a flood, a column, a twisting rope of water, thin as a child's arm, lifting from the floor and rising up like a serpent. It wrapped around the base of the fiddle. The wood hissed. The strings trembled. Bully winced as if the water were crawling under his skin. Ma Delacroix told him this was the offering. The river would drink from the instrument before it drank from him. The water coiled tighter. The fiddle moaned. Not metaphorically, it moaned, a low groaning sound like a tree being split by lightning. The strings shook, violently, though Bully's hands never moved. Tante Useline leaned in and spoke low so only Bully could hear. The river needed to taste the music again. If he refused, it would take the whole instrument and the hands that played it. So, Bully steadied his breath, and he played. He dragged the bow across the strings, slow at first, then faster, trying to remember the tune that called the swamp spirit the night he disappeared as a boy. The women swayed. The candle burned sideways. The water climbed higher around his legs, and then the river answered. A second column of water rose from the floor, thicker, darker, almost solid, and coiled around his chest. Bully gasped as the pressure tightened. The fiddle shrieked. The bow smoked. His fingers bled where the strings dug into them. Still he played, breath short, eyes glassy, but determined. This was the endurance. The part of the ritual meant to test whether a man could hold power without being consumed by it. No one knows how. Long Bully played. Minutes. Hours. Time gets strange when spirits are listening. But eventually the water loosened, retreating back into the cracks between the floorboards like it had never been. The room fell still. The candle steadied. The bones lay quiet. When the ritual ended, Bully collapsed face first onto the boards. He wasn't dead, but he wasn't the same. His body shook for hours. His eyes rolled white. His breath came shallow. The women wiped him down with blessed cloth, rubbed his chest with oils, placed a white feather against his forehead to calm the spirit noise. And when he finally woke, he whispered a single sentence that chilled every woman in that circle. I heard it call my name. From that night forward, Bully wasn't just a musician touched by spirits. He was a man bound to them. The Black River ritual hadn't freed him. It had marked him, and Street Landry Parish would feel the consequences for years to come. We're getting into the part of the tale where the fire burns lower, the shadows lean closer, and even the cypress seem to hush themselves. Section 4 is where the thing that marked Bully Louiseau stops whispering from the water and starts walking on two legs. Folks in Street Landry Parish didn't talk about it in daylight. They kept this piece buried like a crime committed by the land itself. But every legend has a point where superstition steps aside and fear takes the wheel. This is that point. Now, after the Black River ritual, Bully was alive, but he wasn't free. His body healed, but his music changed, not in sound in consequence. Before, when he played, folks felt moved. After the ritual, when he played, the world around him reacted. Lamps flickered, dust rose from floorboards, dogs hid under porches. Children covered their ears without knowing why. Even old men with thick skin and thicker pride admitted their bones went cold when Bully drew the bow across those strings. He didn't play often after that. Only when the urge took hold of him. Only when the pull of the swamp pressed against his ribs so hard he couldn't breathe until the fiddle responded. But the fewer times he played, the stranger things got. Folks began reporting unusual sights out by Bayou Noir. Not spirits, not animals, something in between. The first report came from a fisherman named Baptiste Guidry, a man who had lived long enough to see every trick the swamp could throw. He was rowing his pirogue late one evening. The sun low, water black, dragonflies moving like bits of broken glass. He said he felt a heaviness in the air, a strange stillness. Every frog, every cricket, every bird had gone silent. Even the water seemed to hold its breath. Then he saw ripples moving against the current, not big enough for a gator, not small enough for a fish. Slow, steady, deliberate. He leaned forward, squinting toward the dark stretch between the cypress roots. A tall shape rose from the water, too tall for a man, too narrow, too smooth, too quiet. It didn't splash. It didn't drip. It just stood there, half swallowed in shadow, watching him with eyes the same color as silted river water in a storm. Baptiste didn't wait to see more. He turned his pirogue so fast he nearly flipped it, paddled until his arms trembled. but he said the eyes followed him from behind the trees long after the shape itself vanished beneath the surface. That story should have been enough to scare folks away. But people in rural Louisiana have a strange relationship with danger. They fear it, but they also believe in their right to walk through it. So the next two sightings came quick. A girl gathering herbs saw a hand, long, pale, jointed, wrong curl over the trunk of a cypress tree before disappear, not ing. A trapper swore he spotted a figure kneeling in the reeds, its head tilted as though listening to music no one else could hear. And every time someone saw the thing, they said the same detail. It looked like it was smelling the air, searching for something it had lost, or something that had been taken from it. That something was Bully's music. The Black River ritual may have anchored him to the human world, but it chained something else to his melody, a presence the old women later called the Huntsman of Bayou Noir. Not a demon, not a ghost, a guardian spirit whose purpose was older than Cajun French, and older than the first priest who ever blessed a drinking well. It hunted not flesh but music, drawn to the sound of the bow the way a moth chases flame. The huntsman didn't hunt Bully, it hunted the tune inside him. The ritual had marked him as the only living doorway between worlds, and doorways attract whatever lies behind them. Now most folks in the parish feared the huntsman, but didn't act on that fear. As long as they stayed clear of the swamp at night, they felt safe enough. But safety ain't permanent when spirits start roaming the edges of human land, and soon the sightings spread beyond the bayou. One evening, a man riding home along the old Spanish road saw a figure keeping pace with his horse despite moving through muddy ditch water without a sound. Another time, someone claimed to see a shape pass between two houses, its outline tall and thin, its limbs too long, its head turning without moving its shoulders, and every time someone spotted it, Bully would feel it, not see it, not hear it, but sense it in the same way you sense a storm long before the clouds appear. His chest would tighten, his fingers would tremble, and he'd know without doubt that his playing had stirred the huntsman awake. The old women begged him to stop, but the spirits inside him never let him rest long. The more he fought the urge to play, the more his dreams twisted into visions of deep water, of long shadows drifting beneath the surface, of a single pale hand reaching up toward the light. He'd wake, gasping, sweat cold on his back, and, before he could catch his breath, the fiddle would begin humming by itself, strings vibrating without touch, the wood warming as if someone invisible held it. One night, he broke. He grabbed the fiddle and walked straight into the swamp. Not a word to his mother, not a word to the townsfolk, not a word to anyone. Just walked into the night like a man following a funeral hymn only he could hear. Now, this part of the tale ain't stitched together clean. You'll hear a dozen versions depending on who tells it, but the pieces line up into something that rings truer than truth itself. The huntsman was waiting for him. Some said it rose out of the water as he approached, its limbs dripping, its chest heaving like it had lungs filled with mud. Others claimed it was perched on a cypress root, crouched in the shadows, head cocked, eyes reflecting moonlight like wet glass. But every retelling agrees on this. It didn't attack, didn't threaten, didn't approach like a predator. It watched him. It waited, like a dog waiting for its master's signal. That's when Bully began to play, not to impress it, not to challenge it, but because the song needed out. His fingers moved without his consent. The bow cut the air with a rhythm older than anything he'd played before. The swamp responded. Branches swayed without wind, water stirred without movement, fireflies flickered in patterns, forming a ring around the two of them, and the huntsman rose to its full height. People forget spirits have shapes because those shapes aren't meant for human eyes, but those who saw the huntsman that night said it looked like something trying to remember how to be human, too tall, too narrow, limbs jointed wrong, head bent to the side as if listening hard to understand. But its eyes, those river-silt eyes, glowed faintly with recognition, because the song Bully played wasn't just music, it was the song of their first meeting. The swamp spirit remembered. The night stretched on. Some say Bully and the huntsman stood there for hours. Others say they vanished into the reeds and weren't seen again until dawn. But when the sun rose the next morning, one thing was certain. The huntsman had followed him home. Not physically, not like a man tracking footprints, but spiritually, like a shadow glued to the back of Bully's heartbeat. Wherever he walked, Folks felt a chill behind him. Lamps flickered in his wake. Dogs lowered their heads, and water in bowls rippled as if someone had dipped a finger in it seconds earlier. This was the moment the parish turned. Not because they feared Bully, because they realized the thing tied to him wasn't anchored to the swamp anymore. It was wandering, curious, watching the living with a patience that felt more like hunger. The old women gathered again, Tante Yousselin, Ma Delacroix, and Yvette LaRose, and agreed there was only one path left. Bully had to undergo a second ritual, not to free him, to bind the Huntsman. Because a spirit with no boundaries is like water with no riverbed. It'll take the shape of whatever it touches, and it'll drown everything else. But rituals require more than courage. They require sacrifice, and that's where this next part begins. The ritual that cost Bully everything. The ritual that brought the devil back to street Landry Parish. And the ritual that turned Gaston Bully Louiseau from a musician into a myth. The fire's burning lower now, and this is the part of the tale where even the boldest men in street, Landry Parish, used to set down their whiskey and listen without blinking. Section 5 is where power stops being a blessing and turns into a weight a man can't carry alone. This is where Gaston Bully Louiseau tried to reclaim his own fate, and the swamp reminded him that nothing taken from the spirits is ever returned without a price. By the time the Huntsman began shadowing him from house to house, Bully was a hollowed-out version of himself. His shoulders sagged, his breath stayed shallow. He'd wake in the middle of the night with mud under his nails, even though he hadn't stepped outside. Candles burned out faster around him. Mirrors fogged when he passed them, and every time he blinked, it felt like he saw a pale outline in the corner of his vision, not behind him, inside him. The Huntsman wasn't simply following him anymore. It was inhabiting the air he breathed. The old women saw it first. Tante Yousselin visited one morning, found Bully sitting on a stool with the fiddle in his lap and his eyes rolled just a touch too slow toward the sunlight. She leaned in close and whispered something to him. He nodded without really understanding. When she walked outside, she told Margot Louiseau the truth a mother should never hear. Her son's spirit wasn't walking alone. He was a doorway, and something ancient was already halfway through. Now Louisiana root magic follows rules older than Scripture, and the elders of street Landry Parish knew that once a spirit crosses the threshold, you either bind it or bury the one it chose. There is no third option. The women chose binding because Bully, despite everything, never tried to harm a soul. He didn't summon dark spirits. He didn't practice curses. He just played music that was too beautiful, too fierce, too strange for the world to hold. So they prepared the second ritual, one spoken of only in the oldest stories. A ritual performed at the edge of the human world in the beginning of the river's true heart. They called it the second bargain, and like all bargains, it required a price. Word spread quiet as fog. Men in the parish didn't speak of it, but they stayed home that night and barred their doors. Women lit candles in windows. Children were told not to sleep near the walls. Even the priests felt something wrong and doubled their prayers at vespers. The swamp seemed to shift under the pressure of what was coming. The ritual could only be performed at midnight, at the exact place the river turned from black to darker, the heart of Bayou Noir. Bully walked there barefoot. Not because he wanted to, because the spirits pulled him. Old Margot wept but did not follow. She left him with something far more powerful than fear, her blessing. She pressed her palm to his face, whispered a prayer in Creole, and drew a cross on his forehead with smoke from a cedar branch. She told him to come back, even though she knew he might not. Tante Yousselin, Ma Delacroix, and Yvette LaRose led the way, each carrying tools no mortal craftsman could explain. Yousselin carried a small wooden bowl carved from a cypress that had been struck by lightning. Delacroix carried a pouch of red clay mixed with herbs pulled from the bottom of the river. And Yvette carried the most dangerous item of all, a coil of white rope woven from swamp reeds that had grown only where no sunlight ever reached. Together, these items formed the core of the second bargain's binding. The moon was thin that night, barely a sliver, more like an eyelash left on the sky. The air felt thick enough to chew. Fireflies didn't dare light. The trees leaned in close, their branches bent like they were listening. Bully stepped into the water. It came up to his knees, then his chest, then his throat. He felt no fear, not because he was brave, but because bravery requires hope, and hope wasn't a thing he recognized anymore. His body moved on, instinct shaped by spirits. The water tasted of iron. The mud below him pulsed. Behind him, the women formed a triangle and began chanting. Their voices were low, steady, heavy with purpose. Each syllable throbbed like a heartbeat. That was when the huntsman appeared, not walking, not waiting, rising. It came out of the water the way a memory rises from a dream, slow, distorted, unfinished, tall, thin, bones too long, movements too smooth. Its skin had the wet shine of river stones. Its head tilted left, as if it were listening to a sound only the dead could hear. Bully didn't back away, because the thing didn't look at the women. It looked only at him, like a reflection that had finally found the mirror it stepped out of. The women kept chanting. The river began to churn. The rope in Yvette's hands writhed like a living thing. And then, the real presence arrived. From the far side of the swamp came a pressure so heavy the water flattened. The air bent. The trees bowed. Every living thing in the parish went silent. At the exact same second, something else had come to witness the ritual. Something older than the huntsman. Something that remembered that first duel at the juke joint, when Bully had played music that didn't belong to mortals. The Devourer. Folks misname things from the old world. They call everything devil, even when it ain't. The Devourer wasn't a man with horns. It wasn't a shadow with red eyes. It was a force, a presence, a shape carved out of absence itself. And it was hungry for the same thing the river hungered for. A sound too pure for heaven and too wild for hell. Bully Louiseau's music. The water rose around him in spirals. The surface darkened until it reflected nothing. The huntsman leaned forward, inches from his face. Bully felt breath cold. Black, void breath coil around his cheek. And then the Devourer whispered into the water. A ripple struck the women and knocked them back. Their chants wavered. The rope in Yvette's hand snapped in two. The bowl in Euseline's grip cracked straight through the center. Only Ma Delacroix held firm, though her knees buckled. The Devourer made its demand clear. It wanted the musician. The huntsman wanted the melody. The river wanted the soul. And the world was about to tear him 3 directions at once. But Bully, for the first time in months, made a choice of his own. He lifted the fiddle. He placed it under his chin. He set the bow across the strings. And he played the only song that had ever truly belonged to him. A tune not whispered by spirits, not stolen from the swamp, not wrestled from the devil. A tune his father taught him when he was 7, sittin' on the porch, feet swingin', world still innocent. A human song. The huntsman paused. The Devourer stilled the water. The women stopped breathin'. The world listened. Because the one thing spirits cannot create, no matter their power, is a song born from a human heart. A mortal song. A fragile song, a melody shaped by loss and love and the ache of being alive. That tune cut through the swamp like sunlight. The huntsman bent its head, almost bowing. The Devourer shrank back, its shape rippling. The river retreated around his body. Bully played until his fingers bled. And then, when the final note faded, he fell backward into the water unconscious. The women rushed forward. They pulled him out. His pulse trembled, but held. His eyes fluttered, but stayed closed. They carried him home as dawn broke red over the cypress. He had survived the second bargain, but he had not escaped the price. By playing a mortal song at the threshold between worlds, Bully had severed himself from the spirit's command, but he had also severed something inside himself, something he needed, something the river had been holding for him. And from that day on, every time he touched the fiddle, the bow smoked, because a man can't walk between worlds without losing a piece of the one he started in. And that, friend, is where the final turning begins. This next part is where the curse stops belonging to the swamp and begins belonging to the people. Ease on in again, friend. The night's getting thicker, and this is the part of the tale where silence carries weight. You can feel it, can't you? That hush in the trees, that stillness above the fire, that pressure in the air like something is listening from just beyond the dark. That's how the folks of Street Landry felt after the second bargain, like they were living in the echo of a sound that hadn't stopped ringing yet. This was the turning point. The moment the story stopped, being about one man and his cursed fiddle, and started seeping into the parish like floodwater through floorboards. Because once the spirits were denied their full claim, they didn't just fade back into the swamp. They spread. At first, it was subtle. A cow refusing to cross a certain part of the pasture, a pirogue drifting upstream against the current, a dog howling at a closed window. The kind of strange little happenings that folks in Louisiana shrug at because life down here already feels half a step removed from normal. But then the happenings multiplied and sharpened. People started waking up to muddy footprints inside their homes. Footprints shaped just a little too long, a little too narrow, like something with human intentions but inhuman proportions had. Walked through the front door without bothering with hinges or locks. Lanterns flickered out when Bully passed by, even when he wasn't carrying his fiddle. Children cried when he came near, not out of fear, but out of confusion, like they were seeing something around him adults couldn't see. Place by place, house by house, the parish grew uneasy. Now, Street Landry is a place built on uneasy things. Folks there are used to storms that tear roofs off like paper, to snakes that wander through chicken coops like they own the place, to water that rises 5 feet in a single night. But this was different. This wasn't nature being mean. This was the world trying to correct an imbalance. The Huntsman had been denied its full due. The Devourer had been pushed back but not defeated. And the river, well, the river never forgives. People would later say the curse began the night Bully returned from the swamp unconscious. But the truth is, the curse began the moment he played that mortal tune at the edge of two worlds. Music born from love and memory cut through the binding, but it also tore something wide open. For the next weeks, strange things crept closer to town. A farmer named Roullard Thibodeau found every fish in his pond floating belly up one morning, though the water was clean. A midwife named Selina Fontenot reported seeing a pale figure crouched at the edge of her yard, head tilted sideways like a curious animal. It vanished when she blinked, leaving behind a trail of wet footprints and a smell like cold stone. But the most unsettling sign came from the church. Father Boudreau stepped outside after evening prayers and found the holy water basin filled with swamp water. Not muddy water, pure black water, the kind that only comes from places where sunlight never reaches. The surface was perfectly still, too still. He dipped his finger into it out of instinct, only for the water to ripple outward in slow rings, as if something beneath had gently exhaled. He emptied the basin before dawn. But the next morning, the water was back. By then, the parish elders called a meeting. It wasn't official, no one used the church hall and no one lit lanterns. They gathered beneath an oak tree older than any man still living. Folks came in quiet pairs. Wives held their husbands' hands. Men carried knives they didn't know how to use, and every single one of them kept glancing toward the woods, like something might step out and join the discussion. Margot Louiseau sat at the front, shoulders slumped, eyes red but steady. Tante Useline, Ma de LeClair, and Yvette LaRose flanked her like sentinels. Everyone knew why they were there. Everyone knew who was responsible for the shifting in the air. But no one wanted to say his name, not because they blamed him, but because speaking the name of a man under a spirit's shadow is like saying the name of a storm while it's still forming. It invites the worst of it right to your doorstep. Still, someone had to speak. It was Yvette LaRose who finally did. She stood, straight-backed and unafraid, and told the parish what the women already knew. The spirits hadn't let go. The Huntsman had been slowed by mortal music, not banished. The Devourer had retreated, not surrendered. And the river, angered by interruption, was seeking balance with the only tool it had, proximity. The closer Bully came to people, the more the curse spread to them. Not maliciously, not personally, but inevitably, because he was a vessel half filled with water from a world that did not mix with human life. The solution was simple in words and devastating in meaning. He had to be separated from the parish. Not forever, just until the balance could reset. But simple words don't make simple choices. No mother wants to be told her son must go into exile. Margot Louiseau trembled once, gripped the charm around her neck, and asked the only question a mother could ask. Where would he go? The answer was the one place no one wanted to suggest. Back to Bayou Noir, the only place the Huntsman understood, the only place the river acknowledged him. The only place the devourer couldn't cross without being detected. If a man is marked, you send him back to the place that marked him. That's the rule older than all their scriptures combined. But Bully didn't need convincing. He stepped out from behind the oak before anyone even realized he had arrived. Skin pale, eyes hollow, shoulders bent like he was carrying the weight of two worlds. He'd heard the truth in his dreams. He knew where he had to go. He didn't speak a word, didn't defend himself, didn't seek sympathy, just nodded once and walked back into the woods. Folks tried to follow. No one found him. But the curse didn't stop. Homes still filled with swamp-scented air at midnight. Cattle still refused to drink from water troughs. Children still pointed to empty corners and whispered about the tall man, with no footprints. The parish grew afraid, not of Bully, of what was chasing him. And then, the disappearances began. It started with a trapper named Claude Baptiste. He went into the swamp at dusk and never returned. His pirogue drifted back empty the next morning, paddle snapped clean in half. A week later, two brothers out hunting rabbits vanished 10 feet from where their father stood. No blood, no tracks, not even a ripple in the mud. The priests blamed sin. The root women blamed imbalance. But the old-timers blamed something simpler. Bully had gone too far into the spirits' world, and the spirits were looking for a replacement tether. The curse wasn't chasing him anymore. It was widening. Street Landry Parish started to change in ways too subtle for outsiders, but too obvious for those who lived there. Nights got darker. Sound carried further. Shadows stretched longer. Every wooden floorboard in every cabin creaked like something heavy was walking across it at night. And the people grew restless in their own skin. Dreams filled with river water, nightmares of pale hands reaching through windows, wakened breathless with the taste of mud in their mouths. Even the bravest grew afraid to sleep. By the end of summer, the parish understood the truth. The curse could not be contained. As long as Bully Louiseau lived, the spirits would not relent. But killing a man marked by the swamp would only invite something worse. Ending him wouldn't end the curse, it would break the dam holding it back. Everybody knew it. Nobody said it. So the parish did the only thing left to do. They prepared for the third and final ritual, the one even the old women feared, the one no root worker had attempted in generations, the one the river itself despised, a ritual not to bind Bully, but to sever him from the spirit world completely. And that, friend, is where the story turns from ghost tale into tragedy. This is where everything goes wrong. Settle down deep now, friend. The night's thick as syrup, and you can feel the story closing in around us. Same way the cypress closed in around Street Landry Parish when the severing ritual began. This is the part where the swamp stopped whispering and started roaring, where the air itself felt like it wanted to crawl under your skin and hide, where the people of the parish learned what happens when mortals try to cut a cord the spirits themselves tied. For weeks, the curse had spread like summer fever. The elders knew the parish couldn't survive much longer. Something had to be done. And so the root women, Tante Useline, Ma Delacroix, and Yvette LaRose, spoke the words every conjure woman hopes she'll die before ever having to speak. They said they would attempt the severing. It was a ritual older than all three of them combined, older than the parish, older than the plantations, older than the arrival of Catholic priests, and older than the first slaves brought in, chains. It came from a time when people lived close enough to the river to hear it breathe, back when spirits walked freely, and humans learned real quick they weren't the only ones with hunger and pride. The severing's purpose was simple in words: cut the bond between a marked man and the spirit that claimed him. But nothing survives simple, because the ritual worked both ways. If the river lost its claim, then the man lost the part of his soul tied to it. Most men died. The few who didn't came back hollow, like their shadows were heavier than their bodies, but there was no other choice. The huntsman was growing bolder, the devourer was pressing in, and the people of Street Landry were starting to vanish like morning mist. So the severing had to happen. The problem was that no one could find Bully. He'd vanished into the swamp after the meeting under the oak. Folks searched, they called, they set lanterns on poles near the bayou's edge, hoping he'd see the light and wander back. But Bully Louiseau was gone. swallowed by the same water that had marked him. Some said he'd gone willingly. Some said the river had called him home. Some said the huntsman carried him off like a bridegroom. No one truth sat easy. The parish settled into a dread that clung like mildew. Days passed without sun. Rain didn't fall, but humidity rose so high folks swore they could drink the air like soup. Birds stopped singing. Frogs stayed quiet. The woods felt empty in a way that suggested they weren't empty at all. And then one night, as thunder rolled in without lightning, Bully came home. He didn't knock, didn't call out. He just stepped into his mother's cabin, covered in swamp mud from throat to toes. Eyes glassed over with a film like river silt. His clothes dripped onto the floorboards, but not the way water drips. It flowed off him like something alive sliding away. Margot cried out when she saw him, but she didn't rush to embrace him, because she saw the thing behind him. Not in the doorway, not in the yard, not in the shadows. Behind him, inside him. Something moved between his shoulder blades. Something pressed against his ribs. Something shifted beneath his skin like an animal pacing in a cage. Tante Yuseline later said Bully wasn't alone in his body anymore. She said he was a house with all its doors open, and the huntsman was walking room to room. Bully didn't speak at first. He just stared ahead, hands trembling as though the fiddle bow was still resting between his fingers. But when he finally opened his mouth, his voice came out layered, two tones at once, his own, and something deeper, colder, older. That was when the women knew the severing had to happen before sunrise. They gathered the tools as fast as they could. A rope braided from willow roots, soaked in moon water. A bowl carved from a storm-struck oak. A set of rusted iron nails blessed in salt and buried for 9 days. And 3 candles made from tallow, mixed with river mud. They couldn't wait for the church. They couldn't ask the men for help. This ritual wasn't a Christian thing or a human thing. This was a bargain with the land. The ritual had to be performed at the threshold of the swamp, but not inside it. Spirits respect boundaries. They hate trespassers. They had to stand at a place where the world of flesh and the world of water touched but did not drown each other. They chose an outcropping of dry earth where an old cypress had fallen decades before the only safe ground near Bayou Noir. Bully followed them without resistance, but not willingly. His feet dragged in the mud like something behind him was pulling back. The huntsman wasn't ready to lose him. When they reached the cypress clearing, the moon finally tore through the clouds, pale, thin, sharp as bone. Its light hit the water and split into ripples that moved against the wind. Yuseline drew a circle in the dirt with the salt nails. LeClair lit the candles and placed them at 3 points. Yvette began chanting, voice low but steady. But the swamp didn't like this. The trees rustled, though there was no breeze. Something cracked deep within the woods. The water level rose an inch in seconds, then another, then another. The huntsman was coming. The devourer wasn't far behind. The ritual had to begin before either arrived. Yuseline grabbed Bully's wrist and dragged him into the circle. He collapsed to his knees. His back arched. His arms twisted. His head jerked, like invisible hands were trying to snap his neck. The women pinned him down with the willow root rope, each strand hissing against his skin like hot metal on water. The air thickened. The candles bent sideways. The swamp answered. Every living thing within earshot went silent. Every ripple in the bayou froze. And then the huntsman stepped out of the trees. It wasn't shy anymore. It wasn't hiding. It wasn't lurking in half shadow. It came into the clearing like a man. Returns to his home after finding the door unlocked. Tall, thin, limbs too long, head tilted to the side, shoulders narrow but impossibly strong, eyes pale and endless, as if carved from the bottom of the river itself. The women didn't stop chanting. The huntsman took its first step. The earth trembled beneath it. The devourer followed, not in a shape folks could describe, not with a form a mind could hold, just a pressure, a weight, a darkness thick enough to bend breath. It seeped between the trees like ink leaking through wood. The candles dimmed, the circle wavered, and Bully screamed, not from fear, from tearing. His spirit was being pulled two directions, the Huntsman tugging one way, the Devourer pulling another, the river pulling downward. Useline shouted for LeClair to strengthen the circle. LeClair pressed her palm into the mud and whispered harder. Yvette tightened the rope, and the swamp pushed back. Water surged into the clearing. Branches cracked overhead. Mud rose like something underneath it was breathing. The Huntsman took another step. Closer, closer. Its hand extended, long and pale, fingers jointed in ways that hurt the human eye to follow. The women poured every ounce of their power into the ritual. But the swamp doesn't lose battles. Not against humans. Not against root women. Not against mothers crying into their hands. The circle cracked. Just once. Just for a breath. But it was enough. The Huntsman lunged. The Devourer pressed in. The river surged. And the ritual, already fragile, turned catastrophic. The willow rope snapped. The candles blew out. The salt nails buried themselves in the ground as if pulled by magnets. The swamp swallowed the clearing in an explosion of black water that knocked the women to their knees. When the spray settled, Bully was gone. Dragged, pulled, taken. Not by the Huntsman alone. Not by the Devourer alone. Not by the river alone. By all three. And the only thing left in the circle was the fiddle. Floating. Unburnt. Untouched. But humming. Low. Soft. Alive. The severing had failed. And the swamp had claimed what it believed was owed. What happened next is the part folks whisper about but rarely say aloud. This part is the end of the legend, the final night, the last song, and the true fate of Gaston, Bully Louiseau. Okay, now settle down, my friend. We've come this far together, and the night feels thick enough to wring water from the air. Section 8 is where the tale settles, not because the danger fades, but because the story has finally walked us to the place it always meant to take us. The swamp has claimed what it wanted, the ritual has failed, and now all that remains is understanding how the legend of Gaston Bully Louiseau ended, and why his name still carries weight in street. Landry Parish long after the man himself vanished. After the severing ritual collapsed into chaos, the parish entered a silence heavier than grief. The women staggered back to the cabin, clothes heavy with river water, hair matted, hands still trembling from the force of the spirits they tried to bind. They knew the ritual had not merely failed, it had broken something fundamental in the balance between mortal and spirit. People gathered around them, demanding clarity, asking whether Bully was alive, dead, transformed, or taken. The women could only answer that he was gone, and none of them were certain what part of him had crossed over and what part had been left behind. It was not the answer the people wanted, but it was the only truth they had. The curse did not lift after he vanished. Instead, it shifted. Houses no longer filled with wet footprints, but the sense of being watched began to drain away like fog burned off by the morning sun. Dogs stopped growling at corners. Children slept through the night again. The parish felt as though someone had placed a thick wool blanket over the land, muting everything, not with peace, but with exhaustion. It was the kind of quiet that follows a violent storm, a hush that sits between destruction and rebuilding, and every person felt it in their bones. For 3 days, no one spoke Bully's name, not because they feared him, but because they feared what might answer if his name was said aloud. His mother, Margot, stayed inside her cabin, with the shutters drawn, praying in 3 languages at once, none of which held enough power to ease the weight on her heart. She burned herbs until smoke clung to the rafters. She left bowls of river water on the table. She slept with her hand over her chest because she said she could still feel her son's heartbeat tugging at her like a thread pulled from the wrong end. Mothers know things long before they speak them. On the 4th night, just after sunset, the fiddle began to sing. There was no hand upon it, no bow, no breath of wind to stir the strings. The instrument sat exactly where the women had placed it after the ritual, balanced between candles and bowls of ash. And yet the sound rose from it slow and deliberate, like a memory dragging itself into the world one note at a time. People stepped onto their porches. Lanterns were held high. Dogs lifted their heads and whimpered. Children hid behind their mothers' skirts. Every adult in Street Landry recognized the tune before they even realized they did. It was the same mortal melody Bully played during the second bargain, the song that belonged to him alone, the one he carried from boyhood, given by his father long before spirits started whispering his name. It drifted across the fields and the water and the cypress trees with a kind of aching simplicity that cut deeper than any supernatural sound could. No one had ever heard the fiddle play by itself, but the tone was unmistakable. Bully was reaching back through whatever veil separated him from the living, not to summon help, but to say goodbye. The tune did not stay gentle. As the night deepened, the fiddle's voice grew heavier, taking on the weight of river water and mud, and the old secrets that cling to the roots of trees older than entire towns. The melody stretched into a long, mournful wail that carried not just sorrow but warning. Folks said they felt their breath slow to match the rhythm, as though the song were pulling the air out of their lungs and replacing it with something older and colder. And beneath the music, almost like an undertone, came another sound, a distant tremor rising up from the swamp like the beat of footsteps far too big and far too slow to belong to anything living. The huntsman had not left. It had not been driven back. It had followed the music across whatever boundary the ritual had strained, but it came not to claim the parish. Its purpose had never been to destroy the living. It came to finish what the spirits had begun with Bully. It stepped from the edge of Bayou Noir into the clearing where the ritual collapsed, its limbs shifting through shape after shape, unable to settle into anything fully human or fully spirit. The moon struck its form and split it into slivers of shadow that moved separately, like pieces of a broken thing trying to remember how to reunite. The air around it shimmered, bending in waves as though heat rose from the surface of the swamp, even though the night was cool and wet. Tante Eusline sensed it before anyone else did. She rose from her chair, walked outside, and stared into the trees with eyes that had seen enough spirit work to know when something sacred was passing through. She called out for Ma Delacroix and Yvette, and together the women made their way toward the edge of the clearing. They carried no charms, no candles, no roots or powders. This moment required none. It required only witness, and every root worker knows there are moments when a soul must be watched as it crosses from one world into another, so that the journey is clean, and the path it leaves behind does not snare the living. The huntsman stopped at the center of the clearing. The fiddle stopped playing. The air did not move, not a leaf, not a ripple, not a breath of wind, and then the water rose, slow at first, gentle, a single ribbon lifting from the swamp like a hand formed from liquid darkness. It curled through the air as though guided by purpose rather than gravity, winding toward the huntsman. As it touched the spirit's chest, the shape shuddered, not like a creature in pain, but like something passing through the final stage of transformation. The water wrapped around its torso, limbs, and finally its head. And in the shifting darkness, the women saw a face flicker into being. Bully's. Not whole, not alive, not intact, but present, a memory, a reflection, a final echo. The water sank back into the swamp, dragging the huntsman with it in a slow, soundless descent. There were no screams, no thrashing, no violence. Just a solemn return to the place it came from, taking with it the last remnants of the man it had, shadowed. The swamp accepted the offering quietly, as though the balance had finally been restored after months of turmoil. When the surface smoothed again, the clearing felt different, lighter, almost as though the trees had taken a long breath after holding it too long. The fiddle gave one final sigh, and then cracked down the middle with a sharp, hollow sound that echoed through the parish like a gunshot. The broken halves fell still. The music was gone forever. When morning came, the huntsman's footprints appeared along the bank, leading into the cypress, but not returning. They sank deeper than human tracks, pressing into the mud as though carried by something heavier than flesh. The elders followed them until the trail vanished beneath black water. No one stepped farther. Some boundaries stay sacred. Over the next weeks, the parish healed. The animals calmed. The water settled. The air warmed again. The devourer retreated back into whatever place it inhabits when not stalking the edge of mortal troubles. But the people remembered. They remembered the cost of interfering in the spirit's affairs. They remembered what happens when a musician plays notes meant for something beyond human hands. And they remembered the boy who never chose the path laid before him but walked it anyway because the world between life and death called him by name. Generations later, folks in street Landry Parish still speak of bully Louiseau the way river towns speak of storms that nearly wiped them off the map. They tell his story to warn musicians not to play near the water at night. They tell it to remind children that curiosity might invite things into your life you aren't strong enough to handle. And they whisper it during storms when the wind hums through the hollow reeds just right. Because sometimes, just sometimes, the air carries a faint, trembling sound like a bow dragged slowly across a string that no longer exists. I've heard that sound myself while walking near Bayou Noir at dusk. It slips between the trees, small enough to doubt, heavy enough to remember. And when it comes, I stop, tip my hat, and listen for a moment. Not because I expect to see him, not because I believe he's still out there, but because some men deserve their eulogy delivered with silence instead of words. That's the story of Gaston, bully Louiseau, the hoodoo fiddler who beat the devil, defied the spirits, survived 2 bargains, and finally surrendered himself not to death, but to the river that claimed him. His story doesn't end with a grave or a ghost, but with a melody that once shook the line between this world and the next so hard the tremor is still felt in the parish today. Some legends fade, some legends grow, but bully Louiseau's legend hums in the dark like an instrument waiting for the next hand foolish enough to try and play it. And that, friend, is the last song of the Hoodoo Fiddler.